Hey everyone, Eric Watson here, freelance writer, player of games, writer of words, recorder of videos, and tabletop role-playing aficionado. Welcome to another Roll20 review, my written and video view series where I take a look at the marketplace section of online role-playing website Roll20.net. This video I'll be reviewing the D&D 5e campaign book Icewind Rime of the Frostmaiden, designed by Wizards of the Coast for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition. A review copy has been provided for the purposes of this review. If you enjoy my videos, consider supporting me via patreon.com/roguewatson. Shoutouts to my platinum patrons, Joe, Will, Tiny Dancer, Nick R, Andy, Manuel, Basil, Tom, and Huskarl124, and gold patrons, RPG Papercrafts, Charming Grenade, Pretty Boy Numa, Marcos Dave, Vicente, Gilberto, Shani, K, Cert2B, Adam, Tethers Lounge, Sam, Arash, Limpy Spuds, Jerome, Fatboy619, Scalania, Nick C. Thank you all very much for your support. It is here, Icewind Rime of the Frostmaiden. I'm pretty excited about a horror-themed big campaign book in the far north, the region of Icewind Dale. Even though we kind of saw a lot of Icewind Dale in Storm King's Thunder, my initial reaction is good. I really like this adventure, which is good because I haven't liked the last couple adventures. You know, I'm always pretty generally positive on these reviews, but in part due to the quality of the maps, but also the quality of the adventures, I really couldn't dig in and didn't really see myself ever running or necessarily even enjoying the Waterdeep adventures nor Baldur's Gate Descent into Avernus. So it's been a hot minute since I was able to get excited about a big 5e campaign book. I'm excited about Icewind Dale, Rime of the Frostmaiden. I think it's a very well done adventure. It's if you're coming for the horror, then I think you'll be disappointed because I don't think it actually does the horror thing very well. And it does have its flaws, for sure. We're going to get into that. We're going to analyze the maps. We're going to talk about everything that you get with the Roll20 bundle, which is what this is specifically reviewing. But because this is a new adventure, I will be commenting and reviewing the adventure as well as the adaptation on Roll20. But my opening thoughts are that I think it's a really well-done adventure. There's a lot of really great pieces in it. It's got a surprisingly open-world modular design that works very well, with the caveat that it suffers from not having a good central story. Like if you were picturing Auril here as being the central villain or threat, that's not really the case at all. She's basically maybe a part of 1/3 of the entire campaign, which is very surprising the way they've structured this together. So first, let's see what you get with the Icewind Dale Rime of the Frostmaiden set on Roll20. It includes the Compendium expansion, character art pack, and the adventure module. It's pretty standard. We get 11 non-gridded region maps. So these are basically the maps of the 10 towns as well as Icewind Dale in general. Which I'm going to go ahead and show you what that map looks like. But these are all maps that have, which I'm impressed we actually got town maps for every single one of these towns. They're non-gridded, but you can switch to them in Roll20. And you can show off what they look like. Where the hell? There we go. It's Icewind Dale. So this is the actual region map. I'm going to back out the zoom level to about 50% so you can see. Obviously not a whole lot of color here, but that's kind of by design because we're locked in perpetual night, which is part of the big hook that I'll get into when we start breaking down the adventure. We get one 200-foot map, which is technically gridded, but kind of almost more of an overland map. You can't really battle on a 200-foot map. And that can be a problem in Roll20. You want to do kind of the zoom thing in an RPG where basically you zoom into a smaller map. 13 10-foot battle maps. Now those do include 5-foot subdivisions that Roll20 automatically provides, because to play D&D with a battle map 5th edition, you need 5-foot subdivisions or else things fall apart. Unfortunately, about half the battle maps in Rime of the Frostmaiden are 10-foot scale and not 5-foot scale. So what Roll20 does, and I'll show you in a bit, is they essentially divide up all of those squares into half. So it goes from 10 to 5, which results in very tiny tokens. You have to kind of zoom in on the map a little bit more. It's annoying, but it is a solution that can work. 14 5-foot battle maps, which require no such zooming or anything. Everything looks good. And all of these maps have tokens in place, dynamic lighting in place if you're a subscriber, and I will show you all how that works. Over 50 magic items, over 100 player art handouts, an alphabetized token page, which is all very standard. Over 180 monsters with drag and drop tokens and stat blocks all ready to go. Over 40 named NPCs with drag and drop tokens and stat blocks ready to go. As well as some applicable supplemental rules from the Dungeon Master's Guide, such as madness, alien technology, sentient magic items, and injuries. And obviously things like extreme cold, like anything that is applicable to the things that you will come across in this adventure is included in there, even if you don't own those things in the compendium. So, Rime of the Frostmaiden, the opening hook is that Icewind Dale, which is this region in the far north of the Sword Coast area, which you may have visited there in Storm King's Thunder. We have seen it. In fact, unfortunately, we actually spent a good time. We defended the Frost Giants against Bryn Shander and explored around, I think, the area of Lonelywood. Like, we've actually adventured in Icewind Dale before, which is kind of a bummer because it ends up this is the, I think, better adventure than Storm King's Thunder. The opening hook is that Icewind Dale is locked in perpetual night, which is kind of like that one vampire movie, I think, 30 Days of Dark or something, which you'd think is a good hook for a horror-themed adventure, but it really just comes off as a more standard D&D adventure, and that's not even really a hook. You just... And I'm not even quite sure if you kind of know that Auril is behind all this or not, or if it's just a rumor, but that's just kind of the situation, and the players are just here, and the entire opening thing is just going from town to town, basically solving all these side quests, trying to get the hell out of Tier 1. So, once again, Wizards kind of drops the ball when it comes to providing low-level content when they clearly want to have an adventure that's almost entirely localized within Tier 2. And that's a bummer. In fact, Chapters 1 and 2, I was initially very off-put by this design decision also, because it lacks a strong narrative hook and a story. And this is the big debate between a narrative-focused linear adventure and an open-world adventure. And they can both be very enjoyable, and if we're looking at video game terminology, this is the difference between what is a traditional JRPG and what has kind of become a traditional Western RPG. Now, granted, Japanese developers can make Western-style RPGs and vice versa, but in terms of the genre molds, you've got your, kind of Dragon Quest mold, which is you go to a town, you explore the area, you go in a dungeon, you go to the next town, you explore. It's a very linear sequence. It's very narrative heavy. It's all driven by the story. You've got a very strict. Think of like in D&D, the very first adventure, the Tyranny of Dragons, was very linear. Like, it literally went from chapter to chapter to chapter, and you were supposed to go in that order. The other flip of the coin is, the Skyrim model, or even something like Zelda Breath of the Wild, which is, you kind of know where you need to go, but here's the whole world, and you can go and just do whatever you want, and then there's little localized stories that may have branching paths themselves that take you to different areas, but you're not ever sequestered into a linear series of events or areas. And impressively, Rime of the Frostmaiden kind of builds an open world in Icewind Dale, which is a tricky thing to do because of the big power curve jumps in D&D 5e. And the way it does that is the open world is primarily Tier 1, which is kind of similar to the way Tomb of Annihilation did Chult, which Chult was primarily all Tier 1 encounters. This is very, very similar. I think it scales a little bit better. It can go up to maybe like 5th level, but kind of by the time you reach that level, you're on the next main path. And the other weird thing it does is it divides up the entire main plot into 3 main stories, 2 of which are related, and 1 of which is really not related, which is the first one that you tackle. So Chapter 1 opens up. First of all, you actually have starting quests, which are incredibly weak. It's the worst part of the game, I think, which is this: you're hunting down a serial killer, or you're collecting these little chinguas, which were last seen in Tomb of Annihilation. And the serial killer thing would be a cool idea if it actually had like an investigation and a murder mystery, but it's not. They already know everything, and they're just like, hey, we know who did it, we just need you to go track this person. So it's basically just using an excuse to move around to different areas, tracking this person down, and then taking them out. And it's not very compelling opener. Thankfully, every single one of these towns that you see, all 10 towns of the 10 towns region, has a major quest associated with it. and almost all of those quests has a dungeon associated with it, or an area or something. There's a Duergar outpost, the Cauldron Caves where a Night Hag is in. You can hunt down a fish in the Lonely Wood region. There's a really cool one in, I think you get it in Targos, where you have to go up to Kelvin's Cairn up here, which that's how I would do it, is I would start off probably in Targos, and then you have to go across to Bryn Shander, which is a major city. East Haven has a really cool event where one of the wizards from the Arcane Brotherhood is being burned, and they then have to... you learn a lot about what the Arcane Brotherhood is doing here, which ends up becoming a major plot point for the very ending sequence of this adventure. Caer Dineval and Caer Coneg are both important areas that lead to the first major plot point, which is that there are Duergar in this region, specifically a guy named Zardoc, Sunblight, who is basically being coerced by Asmodeus to take over Icewind Dale because it's perpetual night, so the sunlight-hating Duergar can invade, which is kind of cool. And then they came up to Kelvin's Cairn, which is a really cool map that really drives home a lot of the best themes of being in a frozen winterland, which is, avalanches and yetis and helping, people that are caught and, encased in ice or otherwise battered around by a yeti in a cave. Just a really cool map right here. Just a great example of the design and just a neat dungeon. So that's the path I would take throughout Chapter 1, which is a great highlight reel. But there's interesting things to happen in all of these. And when I first read about it, it really felt like a collection of Adventurers League missions. They were very, disconnected, and you could kind of just go and do them, and they were just self-contained. But then as I read, there are enough connections that lead, to, importantly, the main threat, which is the Duergar. He's got 2 sons, and those sons can be found in some of these different quests, and that's how you learn about this ultimate quest from the Duergar to invade. So if you do the right ones, eventually you can plant those seeds of starting the next major main plot line, which basically doesn't start until Chapter 3. So it's a strange way to do a main story, but it's also... I kind of accept that as the difficulty of running a true open world scenario where you can go to any of these towns and do any of these quests. And then in Chapter 2, it basically is just the open world expanded out to the actual region. Let's go back to the Icewind Dale map. So in this case, Chapter 2, and you can see on the map, which is very helpful, this is all basically on the GM's layer also, so the players don't see these actual notations, and you can choose to reveal whatever information you want. If you want to have the entire map be blank for the players, you can, and have them, entered in, or you can have all the towns be on the map. All of this stuff is on the actual GM layer, so you can choose to move it or not. And then Chapter 1 is all this middle area here where you're going around the 10 towns, and then Chapter 2 opens up to the entire Icewind Dale region, and suddenly the whole place is just one big open world. And each one of these towns, you can gain different rumors or full-on quests to then explore all of these different areas, and all of those areas are also different dungeons. So, for example, there's a crashed Mind Flayer ship down here in the Id Ascendant, I believe. You can explore. There's an awakened whale with a magic bubble boat on its back, and he can take you to. You'll probably need to use him to go to Arl's lair later on. There's a beached frozen ship, which you can plunder all of its riches. There's only an ice troll there, but then as you exit, you realize it's the lair of a freaking ancient white dragon. But that ancient white dragon is very senile. She has the corpse of her wizard friend on there, and she's constantly like, cast your spells, and it's just a dead frozen corpse. So it's kind of played for laughs, but also it's a very powerful creature, so I thought that was a really cool twist. All of these areas right here, the Jarlmoot, Korkalok, there's a Lost Spire, which is really cool. It's an upside down. It broke off of one of the Netherese cities as they were crashing to the ground, which you will get to later in the adventure, and you get to explore through this upside down spire. It's just, they're all basically little self-contained stories, but they're so good, and it just reminds me of the best parts of playing something like Skyrim, which is you just explore the world and you come across fun, cool stuff to do. And that's not a bad way of designing a D&D adventure, as long as you do have a compelling main plot. And that is the flaw, I think, of Rime of the Frostmaiden, is that the initial plot is good. I think if we're dividing the story up into 3 different stories, which the adventure flow basically says these 3 In fact, let's see if I can get to it. Where it says, like, this story is basically made up of 3 different adventures. Yes, these 3 plot elements woven together form this adventure, which is a Duergar despot forging a dragon, a lost city of magic entombed in a glacier, and a frozen wilderness trapped in Aurel's grip. So, the first one you do, we're going to break these down, and I'm going to try to make this review not go too terribly long, but I do want to go over what this review is, and meanwhile, I will be discussing how this looks in Roll20. But as you can see, good maps. We finally put the shitty maps behind us. Sorry, but I did not like the maps in Waterdeep, in any of the Waterdeep stuff, and I think the Avernus maps weren't very good looking either. I'm just not a fan of that bare bones graph paper style. Especially as somebody who plays on Roll20, I want nice looking maps. We're playing on a virtual tabletop. I want good detailed maps. That's what my players expect. That's what I want to provide. These are good maps. So instantly, this elevates better than those. But I do think this is actually one of my favorite D&D 5e adventures for more reasons than that. But as you can see here, and we can tool around to a couple of these different maps, they all look pretty good. You know, unfortunately, there's not a whole lot of color here, because it's the frozen north, so you're going to get a whole lot of silvers and whites and grays, but it's still a nice full color map. This is an example of a 10-foot battle map. This is the Hag's Lair you can actually get to early on. I'm at 50% zoom speed, by the way, so let's go to 100%. And you can see here's... Now, this is an extra large token. This is a frost giant skeleton, but a normal-sized person is this size. So it's not the end of the world for a 10-foot battle map. You know, you might want to... You know, you and your players might want to zoom in a little bit. I'm at 140%. You can see the resolution still looks fine. It's not that tiny. It's not the end of the world. It is a bummer that about half of the battle maps are 10 feet. That's definitely going to be a con compared to something like Tomb of Annihilation, where most of them were 5-foot battle maps. So that's a bummer. But in general, it is doable. But there's a lot of really fun places to go around and do, and I think the open world thing was done very, very well. And thankfully, I think there's enough... Yeah, and you can divide that open world up, too, as you explore, you know, and get back on the main plot. Although, I guess my main problem is that the main plot was divided into 3 different plot stories, and one of them, which is the Duergar Despot, is really not connected in any way to the latter half of the adventure. So the way it goes, you should be level, I think I want to say 6. Where is the... Let's see. Okay, this is a really good flowchart right here. So... The open world portion is basically from levels 1 through 4, which is you're doing the 10 towns adventures, and you're expanding out, you know, once you get ahead of those really squishy levels and going around doing stuff in the Icewind Dale region and hopefully learning more about the problems and wanting to tackle them, including going after Aurel, learning about the Arcane Brotherhood, hunting down this ancient city, and then the Duergar Despot. All those things are happening. The first one that you should do is go after the Duergar, which Chapter 3 is the fortress. And this is a really good... You know, all of these dungeons were pretty small and self-contained, and then we finally get to a pretty big dungeon on the main quest, which is Sunblight, which is here. And look at that. All of these maps I just scrolled through, you can kind of see right here. All of this is Chapter 1 and 2. All of that content is the first 2 chapters, because Chapter 1 has, like... 8 dungeons, and then Chapter 2 has like 10 dungeons. You know, it's just, there's a ton of content in there, and I think it's designed to where you could split them up. You might have to, you know, level up some of those Chapter 2 ones a little bit later if they feel like exploring them, you know, after they get more on the main quest, but that's a lot of the content. And then we get all the way here, which is basically the more linear latter half of the game, where we kind of lose the open world a bit. If you want to jump on the main quest and keep doing it, then you're going to very specific locations, which is... I wish they had paced that a little better, because I think the open world part is good, but it's a bummer that it basically stops after that Tier 1 level range. Sunblight, which is the first big dungeon we get to, is the Duergar Fortress, and this creates a really interesting scenario that I kind of disagree with the pacing that Wizards designs. But when you first get to this dungeon, you see this giant, and you learn through the course of the plot. By the way, giant spoilers throughout this adventure. Hopefully, everybody knows I'm showing these maps. This is DMs only. You learn that what this Duergar is doing is gathering this very magical, unique kind of obsidian to craft a dragon construct under the control of the Duergar. And he's going to use this dragon construct to destroy all 10 towns and just take over the entire region. So it's a cool, like, super villain Bond plot almost. And you go in here, And the pacing is not good because as soon as you get to the entrance, you see this dragon construct take off and begin its reign of terror. Let's see if I have actual good. There's a really good art in here as well. It's going to be under chapter 3. No, it's chapter 4 actually, which is, here we go. Cool picture. And yes, it looks like the freaking its heat beam looks, the way its mouth is designed looks like that thing from the first Thor movie. I forget, the Destroyer or something, where just, you know, really, really cool. And the adventure even says, hey, your players have to make a choice. Do they explore this cool dungeon, or do they go back and basically just skip Chapter 3 entirely and do Chapter 4, which is saving 10 towns from the dragon? I disagree with that premise completely. I would rather the players explore a good chunk of this dungeon, and then during the climax, you see this dragon come out, and then the villain is like, I've sent my dragon out, you know, what are you going to do about it? And then the players can defeat him, and at least stop the dragon from being able to come back and repair, and then go and save 10 towns from the dragon. And they'll see the dragon's path that it takes also. I don't think I have the handout handy here, but there's actually a chart where you can see where the dragon is going to go at any one time. So that creates a really dynamic chapter in Chapter 4. Chapter 3 is just a really good dungeon crawl, though. There's a lot of fun stuff going on here. There's a lot of prisoners that Duergar have. They've got some mounts. I mean, it's a full working, like, giant Duergar fortress in the snow. There's even a rival faction whom the villain is trying to coerce into marrying him and joining their forces, and she, meanwhile, doesn't really want anything to do with him, and she's kind of entertaining the whole idea of joining forces, but really she's wanting to overthrow him so the players can work with her. It just does a good job of combining, you know, there's social things, there's exploration, all that stuff in this dungeon. So really, really, and you know I love my dungeons, and I think Rime of the Frostmaiden has fantastic ones, and this one and the Glacier Caverns are two of the better dungeons I've seen Wizards design, honestly, and I think this is a 4th or 5th level dungeon. So then Chapter 4 is just going back to the 10 Towns region and defending against this dragon onslaught, which is very like Tyranny of Dragons-like, and I think it's pretty cool because this dragon is very powerful. It's got its AI programming is just to strafe, never land, and just almost never land, like a few towns it lands in, and just destroy all the buildings. And it talks about how, you know, there's notes where how long its flight plan is and what kind of damage it takes after each city and how long it takes. So if you're a DM, you can really get specific about if the players want to try to chase it or if they want to meet it in a future city and then defend. There's a lot of cool things that players can do, and it's a really neat situation. I mean, this is like a climax of, you know, the story, and it happens midway through the campaign. The caveat being, I think this is the strongest story of the campaign, and then because the rest of the and it's not tied to the oral, you know, thing or anything. So meanwhile, by the way, we've made it how many sessions? We're 5th level. We overthrew the Duergar plot. We saved 10 towns. Haven't encountered Auril at all, really. Not even a threat. Or that one opening quest, she's technically possessed the serial killer, but that doesn't really amount to anything. Like, it's very bizarre that it kind of buries the lead on what the entire first half of this adventure is. But I happen to really like it. The adventure continues by you just meet one of the Arcane Brotherhood, Valin, who's a necromancer. She's got a bunch of kobolds. Some of them are zombies, some are not. And she basically just tells the players about the second half of the plot, which is, hey, let's go steal an artifact which should point the way to this buried Netherese city in the ice. And in doing so, weirdly enough, the players end up going to Auril's main lair. So that's a big part of the latter half of the adventure. But it's bizarre the way it's paced that way, because the players aren't even necessarily setting out. I mean, she does tell them, like, this should be part of the thing as we can, you know, end this perpetual winter. But I was picturing, first of all, I was picturing this being a horror-themed adventure, because that's what they advertised it, and nothing I just described in that first half is horror-themed at all. It's very good. It's very adventure-themed, you know, going around doing the open-world adventures and having all those little dungeons and then the big dragon thing. All that is great. I love it. I love it. But it's not horror. And then when we get to Auril's domain, the entire point of coming here is to get an item which then points the way to the final third of the plot, which is the buried Netherese city. So weirdly enough, you end up going to Auril's domain, you can defeat her, and it's like you're doing that on the way to this other quest you're doing. Whereas, you think Auril on the cover of the campaign book and this whole horror thing, you think that's going to play into it, and she's going to be this major character, and that's not the case at all. It's called Rime of the Frostmaiden, but that actually speaks to the artifact you're basically finding, the book, in order to open the way to the final dungeon. So I thought that was very, very bizarre. Now, the best way this can play out is if your players don't happen to defeat Auril here in her lair, and instead they can encounter her later on in the final dungeon area, but there's no reason why necessarily they wouldn't try to fight. Now, she's very strong. She's got her 3 forms she can morph into. She's got a giant rock that she gets on, and that's how she actually casts her Perpetual Night spell. But she's not a very interesting character. It even mentions she's an inscrutable goddess who just acts like winter, and even the role-playing notes are like she shouldn't speak much. It's just really disappointing, I think, because I was expecting more from her. This is the 200-foot battle map, by the way, which you can see you can't actually battle on. It's more of a kind of an overland map. We actually do get a dungeon for Grimscale, however. And this is what it looks like when you're just clicking on the journal entries. You know, you've got all the notes here. Yes, you can enlarge them, but these are really where all the notes are for the GM. And if you haven't, or DM, sorry, for D&D, if you haven't bought any of these on Roll20, everything is included in here that's in the book. There's also hyperlinks, so whenever it mentions an item or any piece of information that's in the journal or a certain creature, you can click on that and it will instantly take you to that creature. Creature stat blocks are all built in. You can also drag their tokens. All of their tokens are included, which are included right here. Boom, boom, boom. They're also included in the alphabetized token page, which is a fun way to look at the size differential of a lot of these creatures. You can sit here and just Control-C and Control-V where you want, or you can drag them from over here, as well as provide handouts. This is the way if you want to show your players a picture, you can click on Handout and then click Show Players, and it'll pop up in their journal over here as well as a picture on their screen. So all that is good. If you've already purchased Roll20, you know how to play on Roll20, you purchased modules before, you knew what to expect, but it's good to know that this has, all of those things that you should be familiar with and should expect here too. So it's just bizarre the way they paced it with Auril being the least interesting, despite that being the opening hook, which is, hey, it's perpetual winter, Auril's casting the spell every night, and it's eventually going to destroy the entire region of Icewind Dale. And that's only, going after Auril is only 1/3 of the campaign, and it's the least compelling one. Like, I mean, the ice thing was cool, and this area is, somewhat interesting. It's a neat little, skull dungeon. There's some tests you have to perform in order to open the way to get the artifact, but you could even make it in here without even facing Auril, which is also bizarre. It's just, I don't know, it's weird. It feels like it would work better if the players had to go here and maybe they battle an aspect of her but don't even end up fighting her, and she can still be part of the last battle, although the Netherese city is kind of completely removed from the Auril plot. The only way these two are at least connected is because you at least have to go to her lair to get the actual artifact you're after, which will open the way to the final area, the final plot line, which is finding the Netherese city, is very cool. It's made up of 2 main areas, one of which is one of the coolest dungeon designs I have seen Wizards produce in a long time, which is the Caves of Hunger. And this is a dungeon which we finally get the horror theme that we've probably been looking for. I still don't think it does very well with horror in general, and for some reason they really, they marketed up the horror as being a big aspect of this adventure, and I don't think that's the case at all. This one dungeon, however, they definitely do the horror thing, and they do it through 2 ways. One of them is through psychic hauntings, which can occur throughout different areas of the cave, where the players can be afflicted by different madness-inducing things. And the other one is there's a powerful gnoll vampire who is designed to hit and run and hunt the players periodically in different areas, and he's got the ability to transform into red mist so we can escape, but it's designed to be this very much hunting, creepy, monster situation. And in general, it's just a really cool design dungeon. There's like pieces of the Netherese city in chunks everywhere. There's an iron golem head the players can talk to. The Drow have like built a little fortress because one of the tunnels here leads to the Underdark, so they've built a fortress here. There's some hot pools of steamy water where the Remorazes hang out, and there's a giant mother as well as some babies in there. You can go to the Gnoll lair. There's a bunch of kobold vampire spawn. There's this random ass creature that's come from the far realm that can paralyze people and do psychic damage. There's just a ton. I mean, there's 30 some odd rooms in this dungeon. By the way, I'm still at 50% zoom speed. That's how big this freaking dungeon is. That is enormous and amazing. This is all, and to get here, you've dealt with Auril, you've cracked open the glacier with her magic artifact, and this is the tunnels that you use just to get to the final area, which I think this dungeon is incredible. So the final area, we've gone through my tour de force here, is really cool, but there is a caveat. The really cool thing is it's a buried Netherese city, which was a floating city in ancient times, powered by high levels of magic, and then crashed into the ground like the rest of the Netherese Empire, and is now buried under ice. Really, really cool concept. It really plays off of the Uncharted theme. If you've ever played an Uncharted game, almost all the Uncharted games end up like this, where the final climax takes place in this buried, hidden city. Which is neat. I like that a lot, and it works out pretty well. It's also very much like Omu from Tomb of Annihilation, which Omu is also a lost city that you explored in different things, and you had a map like this. The unfortunate caveat is, for Roll20 purposes, we don't have battle maps for this. So almost all of these notations you can see is a potential area with something cool happening, and it would be nice to have battle maps for all that stuff. Now, I don't doubt that there are people out there who have, if they haven't already, started making good maps for all these different situations. But that is kind of a bummer in terms of being able to play on Roll20. It's, you can put your tokens on there and show them where they're moving to, but in terms of actually battling the many creatures and denizens here, including all the former wizards being turned into Nothics from the madness here, and then the main plot idea is to break into this main spire, but to do that you have to go around and solve basically the things, or you have to find the clues in 8 different schools of magic, buildings, universities, libraries, museums, etc., all around this area. So it's a neat idea because it motivates the players to go to so many different areas in order to break into the middle and actually have a showdown with the final lich. But there's no demi-lich. There's no central villain here. Each of those 3 plot lines is kind of separated. The one thing that kind of ties is the Luskan Brotherhood is here, and one of them shows up. That villain character who tells you to go do all this can accompany you throughout the entire second half of the campaign, and then you meet another Arcane Brotherhood tiefling woman who will show up at the end here with a huge cadre of forces, and you have to kind of make a choice of who to help and who not, and she'll be another faction choice, which that's pretty interesting, especially if you've introduced her early. Hopefully Arl shows up and the players didn't defeat her already, otherwise she's gone and done with 2/3 of the adventure. So it's fun from an open world standpoint. It's fun from a lot of really cool dungeons and neat designs and neat ideas. It definitely drops the ball when it comes to a compelling central plot hook. And that is kind of the debate between open world and a more narrative structure. There's no cult behind it all. There's no blue dragon conspiring to do it all. It's just you're lacking in that central villain, which is something that a lot of these D&D adventures do suffer from, and this one is one of them. But I still think there's a lot of good stuff going on here. I really enjoy the way it plays out. I think it's got a lot of compelling aspects to it. One of my favorites is the character secrets, which is a selection of, I think, almost 20 kind of background-esque character traits that you can get at character creation, and then it's up to the DM and the player to kind of build a story around them. Some of them are okay. One of them is you're kind of blessed by the Frostmaiden, so you have resistance to cold damage. That's good mechanically, maybe not necessarily a great thing to roleplay with. Others is like you've been reincarnated, which is pretty damn big, or you're a secret spy, or you're a secret doppelganger, or you were raised by Yetis and you can speak to Yetis, which should come up several times. The most insane one is that there's a picture for this. You have an implanted slod egg in your body which will burst forth at the most opportune time, killing you, and then that will grow into an adult slod. And yes, it's exactly like the xenomorph from Alien, the Alien series. That's amazing. But compare that with something like, I resist to cold damage. Here we go. This is a picture of it. Like, holy shit, that's so cool. And that kind of goes more into the horror aspect. So I was hoping those character secrets would dive home the horror, but instead they range from that to something that's, just like, oh, I've got some assassins after me or something. But I think it's a really neat idea. I love the idea of all these secrets, and the secrets do play in to the overall campaign and make it really fun, and I think players would have a lot of fun with that. Honestly, I think secrets should be a part of character creation in general every time you make a campaign, and that can be part of what ties them to it. But I'm glad in Frostmaiden they said, okay, here are secrets specifically tied to this campaign that will, make your players more invested or create things you can do with your player characters to make some very interesting story. I can't even imagine doing that to a player, but that's so, and the player knows. That's the cool thing. You're Ripley from Alien 3. Like, you know this. It's a secret that only your character knows and others don't know. So you'd have to work with your player. Hopefully they're on board with that. Maybe they want to find a cure, but maybe they're like, okay, at some time I'll let you just burst out of this character, and maybe you do it when the characters have a way of reviving that player, or you just let them die and create this situation where this creature runs havoc. And it even mentions during some situations, like in the Duergar fortress, you can have the slot burst open, and then that one Duergar woman can be like, oh, let that thing run around, and it'll grow up in like a couple hours, and then it'll start hunting down all the Duergar. You can use it to your advantage. So what a cool idea. I like it a lot. I think it's time to go over our pros and cons for Rime of the Frostmaiden. Pro, the open world modular adventure design for chapters 1 and 2 I think is very cool, and I was initially turned off by it because it did feel like a collection of Adventurers League missions, but once I started digging into it and realized, you as a DM, you can just pick and choose which ones you want to do, and more importantly, a lot of them properly plant those seeds, especially with using the Duergar's sons in some of them to foreshadow future events and lead them towards the main quest, and actually have some pretty big repercussions. And also, because of Chapter 4 being this big, the dragon comes in and starts destroying the towns, being able to tie those characters into the towns via doing these quests, helping these NPCs, helping the people, makes that much more of a climactic, awesome scenario for them to deal with. Pros, over 25 full-color detailed battle maps with tokens and dynamic lighting. Yes! Thank you so much, Wizards, for finally, once again, including actually nice-looking battle maps that we love to use. They all look great. They're well-detailed. Everything's good. I love it. Thank you so much. Over 30 macros and rollable tables organized by chapter. This is something I didn't go over yet. If you go over to this macro tab, you will see basically every time there is a table for like an encounter, a random encounter, or some question the player has, or somewhere where somebody can be in different areas, whatever the book provides you with a D4, D6, D8, D10 table, whatever. There is a rollable table for that. And Rime of the Frostmaiden takes that a little bit further and provides macros, which the only real difference is you can put the macro, as a button that people can click, and it looks better when you actually click it. So, for example, How I Died is what I'm seeing. So we can go to click on How I Died, which is in the reincarnation one. And you can see this is what it looks like, and it just instantly rolls it from the table that's already included. But if you include it as a macro, which we can go ahead and click in bar and just click that button, which is covered up by my webcam, but trust me, it's there. It looks like this, which is a lot better, and actually it whispers it to that player, though you can turn that off and have it be broadcasted. But it just looks a lot nicer. So it's nice that we got all these macros, and they're all in here. They're organized, I believe, by chapter, so you can kind of find them a little bit easier, and it just looks a lot neater than having to scroll through all these rollable tables. And those that secret deck is also provided as a playing card, which this is one of the more hideous UI implementations that Roll20 has. You can see it just doesn't look that good. But you can deal a card. Let's deal to me, and then it will show up. I've actually dealt one earlier, so I've got two here. And then you can see, oh, excellent. I got the slot host. I'm so happy about that. It deals the card to that player as an actual handout via this kind of UI, which is nifty. Pro, detailed wilderness encounters in Icewind Dale that include difficulty ratings. Let's go back to the Icewind Dale map, and you can see, where are you? Only termite. Icewind Dale. The wilderness encounters, which is something that obviously you're going to get in any kind of area where you're roaming around. There's maybe not the quantity is not there compared to something like Chult, which had a ton, but I think the quality is really, really good. And there's even different, there's a lot of scripted events, and everything is basically pre-scripted. It's not just like, hey, they meet this. It's like, no, here's what happens, and here's the complications that arise, and here's the situation. Not all of them are even hostile. But what I really appreciate is they're all given a difficulty rating, which allows you as the DM, and it even mentions in the role-playing notes, hey, sometimes throw them an easy encounter to, make them feel powerful, make it fun, and then other times make it this super deadly encounter that they have to not even deal with. If the Ancient White Dragon shows up, they need to be hiding or something. So I think that's really nice at a glance for the DM to see it like this. Is the first time I've seen Wizards actually organize their encounters by difficulty because, in theory, they could be exploring through Icewind Dale throughout many, many levels, although once you reach around that 6th or 7th level, you're pretty much stuck on the main quest, and you're not really exploring the Icewind Dale region anymore. By the way, I didn't come in on the level range much, but by the time you reach that Necropolis city, it's level 9, which puts it a little bit higher than Omu, and then you're supposed to, in theory, level up a few times in Necropolis. So if you were hoping for Wizards to design an adventure that would last into the teens, sorry, this does not do that. This is a very typical what they do, which is levels 1 through 12, quote-unquote, but honestly, how high of a level they make will be entirely up to you, and more than likely they'll only make it probably to level 10 or 11. If they're getting the Necropolis at 9, I don't know how often they're leveling up in that final area, so it might be at the very, very end they're at 11 or maybe 12, but that's just... I hate to fault Rime of the Frostmaiden for that, because that just seems to be their MO for creating these 5th edition adventures. They've done the research and the focus groups, and they know where the bulk of D&D is being played. Yes, I would have loved if they could come up with a actual campaign and story that lasted that long into those kind of levels, but alas, that will be up to the DM to continue. And unfortunately, frankly, they didn't do a good job with the lower levels either. I think as much as I like the open world design, there needed to be at least a better opening thing to get them over that hump of the very early levels where, a harsh sneeze will kill the party. Or the solution here is to start the party level 2, and then you can open up more of the actual towns, and they can kind of do whatever they want. But it very much lacks, the games, even open world games, start off a very linear open area, which acts as a tutorial. Again, think of like the Skyrim, Dragon Attack, or Oblivion with the sewers, escaping the sewers. Or Breath of the Wild, you're on the plateau. All of the, even as open world as those games are, they still start you in a very specific area with a very specific task to kind of teach you into the game and ease you into things. And then the end climax is obviously a pretty linear area too. So even those open world games are still bookended by linear narrative-driven things, and this one really lacks that opening one. And even those opening quests that are starting quests that you're supposed to get, I think, are a misstep for creating an actual opening, which I'll get to on my con. I got a digression there. Pro, 17 interesting character secrets for new characters and DM notes on how to capitalize them. I love those character secrets a lot. God, Slot Host, amazing. And Pro, excellent dungeon designs from beached ships and Yeti mountain caves to sprawling glacier tunnels and a buried ancient city. Even if you're only going to pull, you're not going to run the campaign as is, but you're going to pull different dungeons out of here, this is a great resource for that, because I really think this is one of their more interesting design dungeons. I mean, yes, Dungeons of the Mad Mage obviously had a lot of really great floors in there, and that was a big pro for that one as well, was it just had really cool dungeon floors. But these really do feel like organic. I mean, that Cave of Growing Hunger would be an awesome just horror ice cave that could be anywhere, and attached to all these different tunnels and things. Absolutely fantastic. That Necropolis you could put anywhere. Really fun dungeon designs. So cons, I've mentioned these throughout. You already know. Lacking a strong opening narrative hook. It doesn't have that nice ease into the game, and I think those starting quests are the weakest elements of the game. Other con is that of the 3 plots that make up the whole story, the Duergar Despot plot is not really tied in any way to the other 2, and it takes up the entire first half of the story. And then it's weird that the oral thing is basically taken care of fairly quickly at around the 2/3 mark, and then the rest of it is the Netherese city. So it's a weird pacing of the main plot quest, and it's not at all what I expected, which was to be the Frostmaiden be the main thing and the horror element to be a main thing. I don't think it capitalized on either of those things. And the other con is just about the battle maps, the fact that half the maps are 10-foot map scale and thus have to use the subdivisions. That's a bummer. I do still love the dungeon designs. I love the map art style, but it does suck that this far along into D&D's 5e's lifespan, we're still getting 10-foot battle maps. Why? They need to be 5-foot battle maps. Sorry. Final verdict. Despite a fractured main plot and the absence of a central villain, Icewind Dale: Rime of the Frostmaiden is one of the best D&D 5e campaigns, with an intriguing open world, memorable events, and well-designed dungeons. Thank you to everyone for watching this video review. You can see my written review at roguewatson.com. You can support my work at patreon.com/roguewatson. And you can follow our own D&D adventures here on my YouTube channel. Thank you.